The chains around his wrists were cold. Commander Daniel stood in the center of the great hall and looked up at the 12 alien species that had gathered to judge him and his crew. The chamber was made of crystal that glowed with soft blue light. It was beautiful in a way that felt wrong, like a pretty cage built for dying things. The Galactic Council had been watching humanity for 50 years. They had seen the small species from the third planet of a yellow sun spread across the stars faster than anyone expected. They had watched humans build colonies on worlds that other species had abandoned. They had observed human ships exploring regions of space that were marked as forbidden. And now they had decided that humanity needed to be stopped. Daniel did not move as the high speaker of the Empire rose from his seat, was tall and thin, with a body covered in hard black plates like the shell of an insect. His eyes were compound lenses that reflected the light in 1,000 tiny points. When he spoke, his voice buzzed and clicked in ways that the translation device in Daniel's ear turned into cold, precise words. Commander Daniel of the human vessel, you and your crew have been found guilty of violating 17 treaties of the Galactic Compact. You expanded into the Orion Corridor without permission. You made contact with pre-civilizations against our laws. You harvested resources from protected systems. The evidence is clear. The verdict is unanimous. Daniel said nothing. He had known this was coming from the moment his ship had been surrounded by warships 3 weeks ago. He had known it when they dragged him and his crew before this council of aliens who looked at humans the way humans might look at insects crawling across their kitchen floor. The punishment for these crimes is exile, continued. Not to a prison colony, not to a labor camp. The Council has decided that humanity must learn what happens to species that refuse to follow the rules of civilized space. A holographic image appeared in the center of the chamber. It showed a planet that looked like something from a nightmare. The surface was covered in black forests and red deserts. Volcanoes erupted along mountain ranges that stretched across entire continents. The oceans were dark and churning with storms that never ended. This is 7, said. It is classified as a Class 15, the highest classification possible. No species has ever survived on its surface for more than 3 standard rotations. The atmosphere contains 17 different compounds that are toxic to most forms of life. The native creatures are among the most dangerous predators ever documented. The plant life secretes acids that can dissolve metal. Even the bacteria will kill you. Daniel looked at the planet spinning slowly in the hologram. He had heard stories about before. Every spacefaring species had them. Worlds that were so hostile, so violent, so utterly opposed to life that they became legends used to scare children. But Daniel had grown up on Earth. He had hiked through jungles where every creature wanted to eat him. He had climbed mountains where the cold could kill in minutes. He had survived hurricanes and earthquakes and floods. His home planet was classified as a Class 12 by the same aliens who now condemned him. He wondered if they understood what that meant. You will be deposited on 7 with 1 week of supplies and basic tools, said. You will have no weapons. You will have no communication equipment. You will have no hope of rescue. This is not an execution, Commander. It is simply a return to nature. The universe will do what the universe does to those who are not strong enough to survive it. The other council members shifted in their seats. Some of them looked uncomfortable with the sentence. The ambassador, a creature that resembled a floating jellyfish filled with golden light, pulsed with colors that suggested distress. The representative, a massive stone-like being that rarely spoke, rumbled something too low for the translator to catch. But none of them objected. None of them spoke in humanity's defense. Daniel finally broke his silence. May I see my crew before we are sent to die? His compound eyes glittered. You may. We are not cruel, Commander. We simply do what must be done to protect the stability of galactic civilization. Your species expanded too fast. You took too much. You frightened too many. This is the consequence. They led Daniel through corridors of crystal and light to a holding cell where his crew waited. 5 people who had followed him across the stars. 5 people who were about to die because of choices he had made. Lieutenant stood when he entered. She was tall and lean, with short brown hair and eyes that never showed fear even when fear was all she felt. She had been his pilot for 7 years. She had flown him through asteroid fields and enemy fire and storms that would have torn lesser ships apart. Sergeant Cole sat in the corner, cleaning his fingernails with a piece of metal he had somehow hidden from the guards. He was quiet and steady, a man who had grown up in the mountains of North Carolina hunting deer and elk with his father. He was the best shot Daniel had ever seen and the person he had ever known in a crisis. Dr. Lisa was packing back and forth, her mind clearly racing with thoughts she did not share. She was a who had spent 20 years studying alien ecosystems. She had survived field work on a dozen dangerous worlds. She had been bitten, poisoned, and nearly eaten more times than she could count. Engineer Palmer was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, staring at the ceiling. He was a big man with thick hands that could build anything from nothing. He had constructed shelters in disaster zones, repaired ships with scraps, and once kept a reactor from melting down using nothing but wire and hope. And Communications Officer Amy was sitting quietly in the center of the room, her eyes closed, her breathing steady. She was the youngest of them, but she had a gift for languages that bordered on supernatural. She had learned to speak 17 alien languages in 3 years. She was the reason humanity had been able to make first contact at all. Daniel looked at them, his family, his crew, the people he was about to lead to their deaths. "They are sending us to 7, he said. "A class 15, 1 week of supplies, no weapons, no communications." Nodded slowly. "I heard the guards talking. They are betting on how long we last. Most of them say less than a day." Stopped cleaning his fingernails and looked up. "What do you say, Commander?" Daniel thought about Earth. He thought about the hurricanes and earthquakes and predators and diseases that his ancestors had survived. He thought about the thousands of years of evolution that had turned humanity into the most stubborn, adaptable, and persistent species in the galaxy. He smiled. "I say we prove them wrong." The dropship fell through clouds of yellow mist that smelled like rotten eggs. Daniel gripped his seat as the small vessel shook and rattled around them. Through the tiny window beside him, he could see nothing but swirling poison. The Galactic Council had given them exactly what they promised: 1 week of basic rations, simple tools, water purification tablets, a medical kit with supplies meant for species that were not human, and a drop ship that would burn up in the atmosphere after depositing them on the surface, making certain they could never use it to escape. Was at the controls, fighting to keep them steady as they descended. The ship was not designed for human hands, and the alien systems flickered and sparked with every adjustment she made, but had flown broken ships before. She had once landed a transport with no engines and half a wing missing. This was difficult, but it was not impossible. "Coming through the cloud layer now," she announced. "Everyone hold on." The mist parted, and Daniel got his first real look at 7. The ground below was covered in forests of black trees with leaves that looked like blades. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks glowing with the orange light of active volcanoes. Rivers of something that might have been water or might have been acid cut through valleys of red rock. The sky was a sickly green color that made Daniel's stomach turn just looking at it. It was the ugliest planet he had ever seen, and it was beautiful in a way that only dangerous things could be beautiful. The ship hit the ground hard. The impact threw Daniel forward against his restraints and knocked the breath from his lungs. Warning lights flashed across every panel. Something in the engine compartment exploded with a muffled thump. Smoke began to fill the cabin. "Everyone out," Daniel ordered. "Move now." They scrambled through the hatch and onto the surface of their new prison. The air hit Daniel like a punch to the chest. It was thick and hot and smelled of sulfur, and something else he could not identify. His lungs burned with every breath. The gravity pulled at him like invisible hands, heavier than Earth by almost half again. Was already pulling their supplies from the burning ship, stacking crates on the rocky ground with quick, efficient movements. Had grabbed a length of metal pipe from the wreckage and was scanning the tree line with the careful attention of a hunter watching for predators. Lisa was on her knees, collecting samples of the soil and studying them with wide, fascinated eyes. Amy stood beside Daniel, her translator device held up as she listened to the sounds of the alien forest. Clicks and screams and roars echoed from somewhere in the darkness between the trees. She was trying to find patterns in the noise, trying to understand what was out there waiting for them. "We need to move away from the ship," said. "The smoke will attract attention." She was right. Within minutes of their landing, shapes began to emerge from the forest. The first creature Daniel saw was roughly the size of a bear, but it walked on 6 legs and had a head covered in what looked like eyes. Dozens of them, all different sizes, all focused directly on the humans who had invaded its territory. Raised his pipe. "How do you want to handle this, Commander?" Daniel picked up a chunk of rock from the ground. It was heavy in his hand, rough and jagged. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. "We do what humans have always done. We survive." The creature charged. It moved faster than anything that size should have been able to move, its 6 legs churning across the rocky ground in a blur of motion. Its mouth opened to reveal rows of teeth that curved backward like hooks designed to hold prey in place while it was eaten alive. Swung his pipe. The metal connected with the creature's head with a crack that echoed across the clearing. The thing stumbled, confused by the sudden pain. Before it could recover, Daniel brought his rock down on its skull with all the strength he could gather in the heavy gravity. The creature fell and did not get up. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, from the forest, Daniel heard something new. A sound that was not a roar or a scream, but something closer to a question. The other creatures that had been approaching stopped at the edge of the tree line. They watched with their dozens of eyes as the humans stood over the body of one of their own. Then they turned and disappeared back into the shadows. "They are learning," Lisa said quietly. "They have never encountered prey that fights back. They do not know what to do with us." Was breathing hard, but he managed a small smile. "Good, let them learn." They worked through the rest of the day to establish a camp. Found a rocky outcrop that would give them protection on 3 sides. He used debris from the crashed ship to build walls and a roof that would shield them from the worst of the elements. Organized their supplies, rationing the food to stretch it as far as possible while Lisa identified which local plants might be edible and which would kill them instantly. Went hunting. He returned as the green sky was turning darker, dragging the carcass of something that looked like a cross between a lizard and a spider. It had 8 legs, a long tail with a stinger on the end, and meat that smelled surprisingly like chicken when Lisa finally declared it safe to cook. They built a fire using wood from the black trees. The smoke was thick and smelled terrible, but it kept the smaller creatures away. They sat around the flames and ate their strange meal in silence, listening to the sounds of 7 coming alive around them. The night was worse than the day. Creatures screamed in the darkness. Things with glowing eyes circled their camp, watching, waiting for weakness. The temperature dropped so fast that frost began to form on the rocks within hours of sunset. They huddled together for warmth, taking turns keeping watch. But they survived. When the sickly green dawn broke over the mountains, all 6 of them were still alive. They were tired and hungry and their bodies ached from the heavy gravity, but they were alive. On the second day, they began to explore. Lisa found a species of plant that, when properly prepared, neutralized its own acid and became a source of water. Discovered that the black wood of the local trees was incredibly strong and could be shaped with enough heat. Amy continued recording the sounds of the creatures around them, building a vocabulary of warning calls and territorial displays. On the third day, found a cave system that went deep into the mountainside. The caves were warm from volcanic activity and protected from the worst of the surface conditions. They moved their camp inside. On the fourth day, Lisa successfully treated a wound using bacteria from the local soil. The same microorganisms that were supposed to kill them could be used to fight infection if you knew how to handle them. On the fifth day, they ate the last of their rations, and they did not panic. By the sixth day, they had established hunting routes, identified water sources, and built a shelter that could withstand the planet's violent storms. They had lost weight and gained scars. They had looked death in the face a dozen times and refused to blink. On the seventh day, when the Galactic Council expected to find corpses, they found something else entirely. They found humans who had stopped surviving and started living. Ambassador L of the Empire had been given a simple assignment: watch the humans die, record their deaths, file a report, move on to more important matters. He had expected it to take 3 days at most. That was the longest any species had ever survived on a Class 15. Some of the betting pools among the council staff had given the humans less than 12 hours. L himself had wagered they would last 2 days, maybe 3 if they were very lucky and very clever. It had been 2 months. The humans were still alive. L sat in his observation post on the small moon orbiting 7, staring at the data feeds with all 4 of his compound eyes. The drones he had sent to monitor the surface showed images that he could not explain, images that made no sense, images that kept him awake at night wondering if his equipment was broken. The humans had built a settlement. Not a camp, not a temporary shelter. A settlement with permanent structures made from the black wood of the native trees. They had cleared an area near the cave system. They had discovered and constructed buildings with walls and roofs and doors that actually closed. They had built furniture. They had built tools. They had built what appeared to be a crude but functional irrigation system using water from an underground spring. They had built a life. El watched as the one called returned from a hunting expedition, with the carcass of a stalker slung over his shoulders. The stalker was one of the most dangerous predators on the planet. It could move in complete silence, strike from the shadows, and kill prey 10 times its size with a single bite from its venomous fangs. Had killed it with a spear made from wood and sharpened stone. He watched as Lisa worked in what she called her laboratory, a small building filled with samples of local life forms that she was studying and cataloging. She had figured out which plants were safe to eat. She had learned to extract medicine from creatures that should have been nothing but threats. She had even begun to understand the complex chemical signals that the native species used to communicate. He watched as continued to improve their settlement, building better structures, creating more efficient tools, designing systems that would help them survive the harsh conditions. The man seemed to look at every problem as a puzzle to be solved rather than an obstacle to be feared. He watched as organized patrols and supply runs, keeping the small group functioning as a unit despite the constant danger. She never raised her voice. She never showed fear. She simply did what needed to be done and expected everyone else to do the same. He watched as Amy sat outside each evening, listening to the sounds of the alien world and slowly, impossibly, learning to communicate with some of the less aggressive creatures. She had befriended a small pack of animals that were somewhere between dogs and lizards. They followed her around the settlement and alerted the humans when larger predators approached. And he watched as Daniel stood on a rocky outcrop each morning, looking out at the world that was supposed to kill him, and smiled. The humans smiled. They laughed. They told each other stories around their fire at night. They had been sentenced to death on the most hostile planet in known space, and they acted like they were on vacation. El did not understand. He had studied thousands of species across hundreds of worlds. He had observed civilizations rise and fall. He had witnessed extinction events and evolutionary leaps and everything in between, but he had never seen anything like this. He sent a report to the Galactic Council. The humans are still alive. They have established a permanent settlement. They appear to be thriving. The Council did not believe him. They sent their own observers. They sent more drones. They sent experts in xenobiology and survival analysis and a dozen other fields. All of them came to the same conclusion. The humans were not dying. The humans were building a civilization from nothing on a world that should have killed them in hours. High Speaker demanded an explanation. He summoned L to a private meeting and asked him directly how this was possible. How could 6 humans survive on a Class 15 when entire armies of other species had perished? L had spent weeks researching the answer. He had studied human history. He had read their literature. He had watched recordings of their behavior on there and in their colonies across the stars, and he had finally found the answer, though it gave him no comfort. There, L said, the planet they call Earth. It is classified in our databases as a Class 12. His compound eyes widened. Class 12, that cannot be correct. I it myself, multiple times. Earth has active volcanoes, earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, and floods. It has deserts where temperatures exceed survivable levels and ice fields where nothing should be able to live. It has predators on land and in the water and in the air. It has poisonous plants and venomous animals and diseases that have killed millions of their kind throughout their history. El paused, gathering his thoughts. Humans did not evolve on a peaceful world. They evolved fighting for survival against everything their planet could throw at them. They developed tools because they needed them to hunt and defend themselves. They developed language because they needed to warn each other about dangers. They developed intelligence because the stupid ones died. Their entire species is the product of millions of years of constant warfare against an environment that was actively trying to kill them. Was silent for a long moment. We sent them to 7 to punish them, he finally said, to show them what happens to species that defy the Council. Yes, L agreed, and we made a terrible mistake. 7 is 3 classifications higher than Earth. It is more dangerous, it is more hostile, it is more deadly in every measurable way. But to the humans, it is simply their home with different wildlife. They know how to survive in environments like this. They were born knowing. It is written into their very cells. What do we do? L did not have an answer. He had spent his entire career believing that the universe followed certain rules, that some things were impossible, that Class 15 killed everything that set foot on them without exception. The humans had proven him wrong. 3 months later, the human population on 7 doubled. A second ship of exiles arrived, prisoners the Council had quietly condemned to death on the same world. They expected these new arrivals to overwhelm the settlement, to create conflict over limited resources, to accelerate the extinction that had been taking too long. Instead, Daniel welcomed them. The settlement expanded. New buildings went up. New hunting grounds were established. New systems were created to handle the larger population. The humans were not dying, they were growing. And somewhere in the back of his mind, L began to wonder if the Galactic Council had not sent humanity to its grave, but had instead given them the key to something far more dangerous. A world of their own, a challenge worthy of their nature, a reason to prove what they truly were. The most adaptable species in the galaxy, the children of the survivors who simply refused to stop. Amy had been working on her project for 6 months. Every night, after the rest of the settlement had gone to sleep, she would sit in her small workshop and tinker with pieces of salvaged technology. She had pulled circuits from the crashed dropship. She had harvested minerals from the volcanic soil that could be refined into conductive materials. She had even figured out how to generate enough power using the heat from the nearby volcanic vents. Daniel knew what she was building. He had watched her progress with a mixture of hope and fear. A communication device. something that could reach beyond 7 and touch the galactic communication network that connected every civilized world in known space. "It is ready," Amy said one evening as the green sun was setting behind the mountains. "I can broadcast on frequencies the Council monitors. They will hear us." Daniel looked at the small device she had built. It was ugly and rough, held together with wire and hope. But when Amy pressed the activation switch, lights flickered to life across its surface. It was working. "Gather everyone," Daniel said. "We need to decide what to say." They met in the central building of New Providence, the name they had given their settlement. 63 humans now called this place home, survivors of 2 separate exile missions that the Council had sent to die. They sat in circles on the floor, their faces lit by the glow of fire and the strange bioluminescent fungi that Lisa had learned to cultivate. "The Council tried to kill us," said. "We could threaten them, tell them what happens if they try again." "That would prove them right about us," replied. "They sent us here because they thought we were dangerous. If we threaten them, we become exactly what they feared." Lisa shook her head. "We need to show them something else, something they do not expect, something that will change how they see us." Looked up from the corner where he had been sitting quietly. "We need to show them that we are not their enemies, that we never were." The debate continued for hours. Some wanted revenge. Some wanted isolation. Some wanted to pretend they had never survived at all. But slowly a consensus began to form. They would send a message, not a threat, not a plea, just a simple statement of fact that would tell the galaxy exactly who humanity was. Daniel wrote the message himself, sitting alone in his quarters as the words formed in his mind. He thought about everything humanity had been through. The wars and plagues and disasters that should have ended them 1,000 times over. The way they always got back up, always rebuilt, always refused to accept that anything was truly impossible. He thought about the Galactic Council and their fear. It was real, that fear. Humanity had expanded faster than anyone expected. They had gone places they were not supposed to go. They had done things they were not supposed to do. From the outside, they must have looked like a disease spreading across the stars. But that was not what humanity was. That was not what they had ever been. The next morning, Amy activated the transmitter. The signal reached out across the void, touching relay stations and communication hubs and the listening devices of 1,000 different civilizations. Every species in the assembly of 12 worlds heard what followed. Daniel spoke into the microphone with a calm, steady voice. "This is Commander Daniel of the human colony on 7. We are transmitting to inform the Galactic Council that their sentence has been received and acknowledged." He paused to let the words sink in across the light years. "We have established permanent settlement on this world. We have food, water, shelter, and security. We have named our colony New Providence. Our population currently stands at 63 humans, and we expect that number to grow." In the council chambers, Ambassador L watched High Speaker's compound eyes widen with something that might have been shock or might have been fear. "We wish to inform the council that we bear no grudge," Daniel continued. "We understand that our expansion frightened you. We understand that you saw us as a threat that needed to be contained. You sent us here to die, and we do not blame you for that. It is what any species would do when faced with something they do not understand." The ambassador pulsed with confused colors. The representative rumbled in its deep, stone voice. The delegates from the other 9 worlds sat in stunned silence. "But we want you to understand something now." Daniel's voice did not change. It remained calm, measured, without anger or hatred or any emotion that could be mistaken for aggression. And somehow, that made his words more terrifying than any threat could have been. "You sent us to a Class 15 expecting it to kill us. It did not. You believed this was a punishment. We have decided to treat it as a gift. 7 is now human territory. We will not leave. We will grow. We will build. and someday we will reach the stars again. Across the galaxy, commanders and politicians and ordinary citizens listened to a voice that should have been silenced months ago. A voice that spoke not with defiance but with simple, undeniable truth. We are humanity, we do not die quietly, and we always come home. The transmission ended. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound could have been. El looked around the council chamber at the representatives of the 12 most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. He saw fear in eyes and tendrils and sensory organs of every shape and size. Not the fear of a threat or a warning, but something deeper. The fear of a fundamental misunderstanding being corrected too late. They had thought humanity was dangerous because of what they might do. Now they understood that humanity was dangerous because of what they were. A species that looked at the universe and saw not limitations but opportunities. A species that turned every prison into a home and every death sentence into a challenge. "What do we do now?" the ambassador asked, its colors shifting to shades of deep anxiety. No one answered. What could they do? Send more exiles? The humans would welcome them, attack the settlement. The galaxy would watch humanity fight back with nothing but stones and sticks and win anyway. Ignore them, pretend this had never happened. It was too late for that. High Speaker spoke for the first time since the transmission began. "We made a mistake. We thought we were removing a problem. Instead, we have created something far worse." "What?" El asked. His compound eyes turned toward the holographic display that showed 7 spinning slowly in the void. A prison, a grave that had refused to accept its occupants. "We have given them a cause," said. "A story, a legend that will spread to every human colony in the galaxy. The story of how the Galactic Council tried to kill them and failed. The story of how humanity looked at the worst the universe could offer and said it was not enough." He paused, and his next words came out in a whisper that the translators barely caught. "We have given them something to prove, and now they will spend the rest of eternity proving it." The meeting ended without a decision. There was no decision to make. The Council had tried to eliminate humanity, and humanity had answered with a message that said more than any declaration of war ever could. "We are still here, we will always be here, and there is nothing you can do about it." Hope died in the council chambers that day. Not hope for victory or hope for peace, but hope that the galaxy would ever be simple again. Hope that the rules would ever apply to everyone equally. Hope that some problems could be solved by exile and death and the cold mathematics of survival. Humanity had broken those rules, and now everyone had to live with the consequences. 20 years had passed since the first humans set foot on 7. 20 years since the Galactic Council had sent 6 people to die on a world that should have killed them in hours. 20 years since everything the galaxy believed about survival and adaptation and the limits of biological life had been proven wrong. New Providence was no longer a settlement, it was a city. Towers of black wood and volcanic stone rose from the landscape where nothing but bare rock had existed before. Roads connected dozens of smaller communities that had spread across the continent. Factories powered by geothermal energy produced tools and machines and goods that rivaled anything made on the most developed worlds in the galaxy. Universities taught courses on survival, xenobiology, and the strange new sciences that only humans could have invented. The population had grown to over 50,000. Ships continued to arrive from human colonies across the stars, bringing volunteers who wanted to be part of the impossible experiment. They called themselves born, even if they had not been born on the planet, because surviving here changed you in ways that could not be undone. Ambassador L had requested permission to visit New Providence many times over the years. Every request had been by the Galactic Council, which had spent 2 decades trying to pretend that the situation on 7 was temporary, that the humans would eventually die out, that the universe would eventually correct the mistake they had made. But now L was old. His carapace had faded from black to gray. His compound eyes did not see as clearly as they once had. He knew he did not have many years left, and he did not want to die without understanding. He went anyway without permission. He took a small ship to the edge of the system and transmitted a single message. "I am Ambassador L of the Empire. I was one of those who condemned you. I wish to speak with you before I die." The response came within hours. "You are welcome in New Providence. A shuttle will meet you at the orbital station." The shuttle that arrived was human-built but designed for non-human passengers. The seats adjusted to his body shape. The atmosphere was filtered to remove compounds that might harm him. The pilot, a young woman who had been born on 7, spoke his language without a translator device. She had learned it from Amy, who had spent the past 20 years teaching anyone who wanted to understand alien communications. "You are one of the original 6, Elle said as they descended through the yellow clouds. "The pilot." The woman smiled. "My mother. She died 3 years ago, a rockslide during a mining operation. She was 72 years old and still insisted on being in the field." Elle processed this information. "I am sorry for your loss." "Do not be. She lived longer than anyone expected. She saw this world go from a death sentence to a home. She watched her children and grow up in a place that was supposed to be impossible. She died doing what she loved, surrounded by people who loved her." The pilot paused, guiding the shuttle through a layer of turbulence with practiced ease. "That is more than most people get." New Providence spread out below them as they broke through the final cloud layer. Elle stared at the impossible city through the viewport and felt something he had not felt in decades. Wonder. Pure, unfiltered wonder at what these strange creatures had accomplished. Governor Daniel was waiting for him at the landing pad. The man was old now, his hair completely gray, his face lined with the marks of a life spent surviving. But his eyes were the same. Calm, steady, unafraid. "Ambassador L," Daniel said, "it has been a long time." 20 years, Elle agreed. "I have watched you from orbit for most of them. I have seen everything you have built, and I still do not understand how." Daniel smiled. "Would you like a tour?" They walked through the streets of New Providence together, an alien ambassador and a human governor who had once been condemned to die. Citizens nodded respectfully as they passed. Some were clearly born on other worlds, their bodies still adjusting to the heavy gravity and toxic air. Others moved with the effortless grace of people who had never known anything different. Elle saw schools where human children learned alongside the few alien visitors who had been brave enough to come. He saw hospitals where doctors treated injuries from local wildlife attacks with medicines derived from those same creatures. He saw parks where people relaxed in the shade of modified native plants that no longer secreted acid. He saw a civilization that had no right to exist, thriving in a place that should have killed it before it could begin. They ended at the same rocky outcrop where Daniel had stood every morning for the past 2 decades. The view stretched for miles in every direction. Mountains and forests and rivers, and the distant glow of other settlements on the horizon. A world that had been tamed by nothing but human stubbornness. "Why did you not attack us?" Elle asked. "You had every right. We tried to murder your people. We sent you here expecting you to die. Every rule of war would have justified retaliation." Daniel considered the question for a long moment. "Because vengeance would have proven you right about us. You feared humanity because you saw us as conquerors, as destroyers, as a plague spreading across the stars. If we had attacked, we would have become exactly what you feared. We would have given you a reason to unite against us. We would have started a war that would have lasted for generations and killed billions." He turned to face Elle directly. "Instead, we chose to build. We chose to prove that humanity is not a threat to be eliminated but a partner to be welcomed. Your sentence gave us a world. Your fear gave us purpose. Your hatred gave us the chance to show the galaxy what we truly are." Elle stared at the impossible city. And what are you? Daniel smiled, not with triumph or cruelty or any of the emotions Elle might have expected. Just a simple, warm smile that made the old ambassador feel something he had not felt in a very long time. Hoping. We are the species that looks at the worst the universe can offer and says we can work with this. We are the children of a who learned to turn every obstacle into an opportunity. We are not your enemies, ambassador. We never were. He extended his hand, a human gesture of peace and trust that Elle had studied but never experienced. We are your neighbors, and we would very much like to start over. Elle looked at the hand. He thought about everything that had happened, the exile, the survival, the message that had echoed across the galaxy and changed everything. He thought about the fear that had driven the Council to condemn humanity and the fear that still kept them from admitting their mistake. And he thought about what it would mean if that fear could finally end. He reached out with his own limb, the hard plates of his arm meeting the soft flesh of Daniel's palm. The contact was strange, alien in the most literal sense, but it was also warm in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. Start over, Elle repeated. I think I would like that. News of the meeting spread across the galaxy within days. The Galactic Council condemned Elle for his unauthorized visit. Some called him a traitor. Some called him a fool. Some called for sanctions against the Empire for allowing one of their ambassadors to legitimize the human presence on Seven. But others saw something different. They saw a handshake between two species that should have been enemies. They saw the possibility of peace where there had only been fear. They saw a future that did not have to be defined by the mistakes of the past. Within a year, other ambassadors had made the journey to New Providence. Within 5 years, formal diplomatic relations had been established between humanity and 6 of the 12 council species. Within 10 years, the first joint research stations had been built in orbit around Seven, where human and alien scientists worked together to understand the secrets of adaptation. The Galactic Council never officially apologized for what they had done, but the exile ships stopped coming. The condemnation stopped being issued, and slowly, reluctantly, the galaxy began to accept that humanity was here to stay. Daniel died at the age of 91, surrounded by his children, and in the city he had built from nothing. His last words were simple, spoken to his oldest daughter as the green sun of Seven set outside his window. "Tell them we forgave them," he said. "Tell them that was always the point." And in the halls of 1,000 alien governments, hope was no longer dead. It had simply changed its shape, because the most dangerous species in existence had chosen mercy over vengeance, peace over war, building over destruction. And that, in the end, was the most human thing of all.